Coffee stay black, just like me.
Hey yo, did you know that coffee is the second most sought after commodity in the world, right after oil? It's worth an estimated $100 billion a year. That's big stacks, family. That's stacks on stacks. Modern coffee culture is immersive. Baby seeds to morning cups, farmers abroad to local roasters, the global product both makes the world run and brings people together. But the lesser known reality is this: coffee was swindled from Africa in the 16th century. Coffee Black is an emerging social enterprise that seeks to bring back the intersection between Black history and Black coffee. And at Coffee Black, we believe Black communities re-engaging in coffee is both a means to reclaim a stolen destiny and build generational wealth within the diaspora.
Coffee stay black, just like me. Don't need no sugar, don't need no cream. Coffee stay black, just like me.
What up, my guy?
Man, it's good to see you. Good to see your son.
You too,
Hope
man.
y'all are
The young
getting some
king got his
rest.
eyes open.
I know, man. Look at
Yeah,
you.
bro, he tripping me out.
Hey, bud.
Yeah. Say hello. He can't talk.
Man.
Well, I'm gonna run the intro just because
No.
stuff, but yeah. What's up? So my name is Bartholomew Jones. This is the Coffee Black podcast. I'm an educator. I'm an MC. I'm a coffee nerd, the founder of Coffee Black. We're trying to make coffee black again. You know what I mean? And I'm here with my homie Jared Myers, and we're gonna be talking about this kind of collaborative concept we're doing in our neighborhood. Jared's my neighbor. He moved in here. When y'all move in, bro?
2011.
2011. So he was in the neighborhood
9
before
years.
we got here.
Yeah.
We moved in maybe like 2016, 2015, something like that. But Jared's an OG in the neighborhood, and he and his family do amazing work in the neighborhood. So I'm going to let you tell a little bit about what you do, but we're going to be talking about gentrification, which is kind of like a spicy topic, specifically because I'm in the coffee industry, and coffee is often seen as like a signifier for gentrification, which is one of the reasons why I never wanted to have a coffee shop. Where I was like, we'll sell coffee, we'll do wholesale stuff, we'll do coffee events, but coffee shops are just going to contribute to gentrifying our neighborhood. And I thought that until you kind of pitched this idea to me for some spaces that your organization is kind of rehabbing down the street, like literally 2 or 3 blocks down the street. So before we get into all of that, Jared, tell us about what you do, bro.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me and just inviting me to opportunity to have these conversations, because that's where we're going to achieve, hopefully, development, right? It doesn't happen through not just bricks and mortar, but it's through conversations and relationships being built. And that's at the core of what we do for the organization that I work for, the Heights Community Development Corporation. CDCs are rather young in Memphis, relatively speaking, nationally. CDCs have been around in other major cities for a long time, doing redevelopment work, and we are now in a time period of where CDCs are sort of the frontline soldiers, if you will. I don't really like using war terminology, but I'll throw it out there that to fight back against the displacement and the negative impacts of gentrification, because that is the reality. Is that, you know, like you said, coffee shops, things like that can have these negative stigmas to them and perpetuate gentrification from happening. And but I think that's a large part of the conversation, is like talking to residents and finding a sense of space and wanting my neighbors to be my neighbors long term and not just for short term. So anyway, I think the other commonality we have is we're both Memphians, and I think that's something that's
raised. Where you from in the city, bro?
Man, so Parkway Village is where I grew up. Went to.
Hey, if you from Memphis, you know about Parkway Village.
You know, it's a weird neighborhood that I think folks either been through or have a family member that stayed there at one time. It's just like, oh yeah, we know someone, or closer to Hickory Hill. You know, my parents moved to Memphis in the 70s. But, you know, before I was born, and then grew up in Parkway Village where my mom still stays, and I dropped my daughter off over there this morning. So She's spending some time with her grandmother today. But I think that's like, I grew up in that neighborhood, the only white kid in the Cove, the whole time being there, and one of the only white families that didn't move out during white flight. And I think that's just, it's like my dad and my mom like saw like the neighbors do that, and when they purchased their house, thought that we were going to go to the school in the neighborhood and be able to grow up in that neighborhood.
Give me like the last 2 minutes again. We had a weird sound issue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was saying we both grew up in Memphis. I grew up in Parkway Village, and it's where my daughter's right now. My mom still lives over there in the neighborhood we grew up in. And growing up as one of the white kids on the block, the only white kid on the block, when all of the other white families have moved out, like they participated, all the other families of Parkway Village and Hickory Hill, one of the newer suburbs of Memphis, during that time, they all left and moved out east to the suburbs out that way. So
Hickory Hill would be kind of considered what people say an exurb, right?
Right. That's right.
If you're not familiar with that, so background a little bit, this is going to be a fun conversation because in college, part of my education was sociology, particularly with the bent towards community development, Christian community development to be specific. So reading like John Perkins, the other JP. And then I was in Chicago, so Wayne Gordon, a lot of that stuff, and being connected with CCDA. So Jerry like runs in that same lane. So there's some terminology I think we both are familiar with. It may be beneficial to kind of define those things just for the audience. So I grew up in Whitehaven, which is technically an exurb. It's an area. Would you mind defining that just so people kind of know what that is?
Well, I think it's an area that developed as cities started to sprawl, and you had urban sprawl take place. That was like one of the original suburbs of a city, right? And what happened over time is that white people were afraid of living with Black people, and white people moved out of those original suburbs, and they became exurbs, kind of that term. And I think you brought up a good point. I actually got an email from someone this morning talking about Lawndale and us being able to lean on some of their experiences with gentrification so that we can also learn, like, what did they do to try to, or what did they do wrong? Like even learning from some of the mistakes that have happened, through that. So this CCDA, Christian Community Development Association model that's out there, it's not perfect. Just like, we live in this broken, fallen world, but we can still learn from each other through our trials. I think errors.
There's a certain amount of so one of my favorite writers and thinkers is Makoto Fujimura, and he's like a Japanese mineral painter. He paints with like precious minerals. It's just, forget the name of the Japanese art form, but he does these large scale paintings with precious minerals. And my little guy is turning up. I think he's hungry. Are you hungry?
You can't really help with that guy. You're gonna have to.
I'm about to. He looking out. Okay, give me a second. Let me go take a to his mom real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay.
So exurb, just define that term. But I was just saying, like, there's a bit of, I guess you could say there's some utility in the sense that Christian community development has never went mainstream. And Makoto Fujimura, who's one of my favorite artists, talks about how a part of the faith, I don't even really use the term Christian personally, because I feel like it's been gentrified too. But like people who follow Yeshua or follow the way, right? Or as in Ethiopia, they would say the Bisrat, right? People who follow this tradition tend to find themselves making their theology and finding their understanding of God at the margins of society. And I think that's where this faith practice is best, right? We kind of do our best work when we're the underdogs. I don't think we do. A lot of times we don't really interpret scripture well when we're comfortable, and that's not like a rule or anything. But I think that's kind of when you see, and historically, that's where you get the best track records. And so he talks a lot about being generative and being in the margins of society, and being generative in the margins of society. And so what I'm saying is that CCDA has a certain utility because a lot of the ideas haven't went mainstream yet. They haven't been applied on a large scale for how people who claim to practice our faith move. And so being in the coffee space, a lot of the things that people think are really innovative for the way we do our business are really just me taking the practices I learned in CCDA or the practices I learned as a critical pedagogue, as an educator in urban education reform. I'm just applying those practices, those theoretical practices, to a coffee business. You know what I mean? And most people who come into coffee business don't take the time or don't come through their theoretical background, and they just end up in, oh, I'm just doing business. That is not informed by any other perspective. So these ideas I think are useful because there are a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are in the coffee industry and are curious about other ways of doing this so that it doesn't kind of perpetuate the same cycle, right? And so it's useful for people to kind of know some of the theoretical background so people can go recommend, read, or, find sources to inform their own practice.
Yeah, I think about that too. You hit a point when I moved away from Memphis and was really burnt out on the church and kind of walked away from my faith in that way, but ironically went and worked for another ministry, right? Because that's where my social capital was and the job was in Colorado. It was like really comfortable there. And then like being shook by that, I was like, you know what? Like, I think God sends us to the wilderness to focus on and be in tune with him. But the theology and the building of how God works is really happening when we are on the road to Damascus, like when we are meeting with Zacchaeus, when we are meeting with the afflicted, like that's when we understand and we get to know more about who God is and why he created us. So,
and I think the practice of our faith is worked out even in even when we look at just the didactic or the linear trajectory of how these things transpired. The gospel wasn't communicated in heaven. It was communicated once he incarnated, right? Once he was in the uncomfortable position of being on the margins of he didn't just proclaim the gospel from the heavens. And so I think that a lot of times there's just this energy of trying to proclaim good news. Whether you're a practitioner of the faith of Yeshua or not, we try to proclaim justice and goodness from comfort, and that don't work. It doesn't work like that. You know what I mean?
So you hit something hard there. As like, what happened to our family recently, and like we have transitioned out of the neighborhood for a short time. But the reality is, I've got to work on my heart to figure out like the judgment that I have, or like even just like the hate that I have in my heart for people who don't try to do this work in the neighborhood, or they're living in another community, but will try to come into the neighborhood and then try to, do great work. And it's that balance of like, well, they may not live in neighborhood, they may live out east or live in a more affluent community, but still do this work and just say, well, what makes them not able to do it the same way as me? So there's that balance. Like it is really
that's real, bro. And what happened to you, I don't know if you want to share, but like that is when the rubber meets the road. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and there are no easy answers anymore. Cause like, the kind of the model was my kids are going to go to school here in this neighborhood. We're going to go to church in this neighborhood. I'm going to work in this neighborhood. I'm going to shop for groceries in this. I'm going to do everything here so that I'm experiencing everything that my people are experiencing. And I think that model a lot of times was made for white people who want to do the work, or for privileged people. And not like, I grew up in the hood in Memphis. So being in the hood in Memphis isn't like I need to be here to understand type of situation. Right. But even still, that was the model I'm looking at because it's the only model for really addressing these things systemically. So I was like, well, I'm just going to follow this. And it was like, at a certain point, I was like, I'm as a teacher, I'm like, I don't want my kids to go to public school here.
Yeah,
I don't even want to teach here. I left being a teacher and was like, I'm going to start a business. You know what I mean? Because the work that I want to do, the boundaries, the amount of oppression in the neighborhood from a lot of these systemic things didn't allow me to do the work. So I had to find a way to get away from the limitations that they put on people who are in, those neighborhoods, so that I can actually move freely in the neighborhood financially. So it's weird, bro. But like what you're saying is like when the things that happen, like the things that happen to you all, like there are no easy cookie cutter. What John Perkins said, that's like, that don't work no more. Because your wife looking at you like, hey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, so for context, our house was shot up on New Year's Eve. We don't think it was targeted. Fortunately, no one was injured physically from this. You
You don't think it was targeted?
No, I think after all the police had done some, so-called inspection, I'm not really in a positive attitude about how the police have dealt with this and other things in our neighborhood. I try to remain, a moderate in some of these things, but it's also just like, man, when it comes to your family, just kind of seeing the services that you're getting and receiving in the neighborhood, it's the same thing too. I mean, it's like,
you
oh,
white.
well,
that's this how they doing you. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like,
not only that, like we have some pull. Like our organization has meetings. I've got the direct phone number to the people with the power, and at the same time, that doesn't matter. Like there is just like this brokenness to the system, just like in education. Like you may think, well, I know these people. Yes, they're looking at zip codes. They're looking at just the I may not even be looking. That's the thing, is it's so broken that it's just going to continue to perpetuate.
When you call, it goes to the
in this way
that's associated with whatever vicinity you're in. So they're only there, and maybe they just have a certain kind of I ain't even gonna get into that, bro, because it's a whole other.
But anyway, you're right.
I think, but there's a point that being in the neighborhood, and this is why our shop is, if we're doing a shop, it's in the neighborhoods, because being in the neighborhood affords you a certain amount of understanding that you don't get when you're just commuting.
Absolutely. And it's hard to like put that into perspective of people until you actually do it. And I think there's like, you're right. Like, and people who grew up in the neighborhood, we would say, I like the term disinvested, because that talks more about the structural and external factors that have impacted our community. It's not our neighborhood's fault. It's the external causes of racism and economic loss when factories close or chose to close or move to a different neighborhood, when the jobs closed, when the schools closed, or when the white churches created charter schools or private schools. I mean, when the white churches created private schools that drew people out of the neighborhood, and it was really racism that drew them out of the neighborhood or pushed them out.
Like the private Christian schools. You know what I mean?
They're still here. They're still around. Yeah.
Bro, this is the crazy part. Is like when I was in Whitehaven, my moms didn't want me to go to the public school. So we were staying in these apartments next from the PJs. Like, right, we shared a fence with the PJs. If you're from Memphis, you know Pepper Tree. And so my mom was like, I don't want you to go to school over here. So she found a way, I don't know how, to get me in this, like, I ain't gonna say raggedy, but it was like a very small.
It was gateway, right?
Hold up. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Christian school. And it was like a private school. It was like 30 minutes away. We had to drive down the interstate every day. She was like, I want you to get a quality education. Now, thankfully, in retrospect, I think the high school in my community is one of the best ones in the city. Like, Whitehaven is a great school. But a girl had just gotten stabbed in the head with some scissors. So my mom's was like, I don't care what the scores is like, I don't want you over there. So I was like, okay, I'm a kid, you can't do nothing about it. And I remember, like, I've had so many experiences, some good, some bad there, but all of them hilarious. And it was one of those things where I was like, man, these places, when we learned that these schools were started as a means to perpetuate and continue segregation. You know what I mean? They're started by people who didn't like segregation and felt like,
look at when they were founded. I mean,
bro,
they were all founded the same year
immediately. So I think let's dial it in real quick for the purpose of our conversation. You all had something really serious happen, and I think when that happened, y'all had to make a decision. And my wife was scared. Like, my wife was scared because y'all live like 10 houses away from us. You know what I mean? And so somebody followed me home. I don't know why somebody followed me home. It was like we were driving and somebody was like just trailing me. So I like drove by y'all house where the police was. And then they stopped when they saw the police. I was like, this is weird. It makes you reconsider what you're going to do. You know what I mean? And so, like,
for sure.
There are kind of two different sides I want to talk about this with you. And I love talking to you because, like, you understand the things that I'm referencing. You know what I mean? And so I think I learn a lot whenever I speak with you about these issues, because you live what you're talking about. So there are two issues, I think, and we can talk about these, and then if you have anything you want, we can talk about the AGCC, kind of what it is at the end, hours and stuff. But like, if coffee is normally seen as a means that to gentrify a neighborhood, I think for me, one of the best ways to not be a part of gentrification, right, is to become an actual community member, a contributing community member, purchasing real estate, like living there, attending church, shopping, schools, all of that, like really investing in the community institutions that exist there, listening to music from artists who live there, all that type of stuff. So that's one of the strategies to do, and we can talk about how to do that well. Then there's the other side of things, which is like, what are the challenges of attempting to do those strategies? So one, like, what would those strategies be? And we can identify those. I think we kind of already talked about it. But two, like, what are the challenges of trying to do that? If you try to do that, what challenges will you face? And a lot of things, and I'll say this, I think a lot of times when we see that, it's kind of a circular reasoning here, because when you try to do this, you run into issues. The issues you run into are the same issues that everyone else who lives in the neighborhood runs into, which is the reason why somebody needs to move into the neighborhood in the first place. And so it becomes kind of circular, but I think for now, we can kind of bifurcate these things just to clarify. So first, what are some of the things that in your experience as your community, y'all primarily focus on blight? What are some of the things that your organization has found will address gentrification? And then what we can talk secondly about what are some of the issues that come from trying to follow those strategies. And you can just speak from personal experience in this particular neighborhood in the Heights.
Yes.
We're in north-ish Memphis.
Yeah, we've been looped into North Memphis somehow. Even though I don't know. I mean, growing up here, it was kind of even hard. Like, not even know. Memphis is such a city with like very like loose boundaries to communities, and like a lack of neighborhood identity in a lot of ways, because we've been torn apart. Like, it's just really sad what's happened when you have people who are jumping neighborhood to neighborhood. When you live in Fraser, then you move to Raleigh, then you move to Parkway Village, then you move to Westwood, then you move. So like, that's an issue too, is that because we have such a high poverty rate, we also have lack of identity in our neighborhoods and our spaces. That's a whole nother thing.
And I feel like that's a new issue, because when I was growing up, I'm 30. So when I was like I guess it would be 15 years ago, your neighborhood was your neighborhood. Like, gangs were associated via neighborhood, like families, schools, everybody. You kind of sorted yourself where you from. You would say a neighborhood. You know what I mean?
But if you ask a kid now, where they go to high school, they go to 5 or 6 different high schools in 1 year, and that's why you
ask them where you from. They're like, Memphis. I'm like, what part?
Yeah. No.
What part of Memphis? Like, what area? What, oh man, I'm just from Memphis. I grew up. I'm everywhere. Like that's kind of
It's
in a lot of ways, it feels like things are getting worse.
Yeah, I that's a whole nother thing. I think too, for the where we are in the conversation, and your knowing your outlook on gentrification and the buzzword and the term that it is has the negative connotations. Like, it's a solely negative thing. I don't like to get in semantics with things, because like there are a lot of folks who would say, well, gentrification is not inherently
I was like, let's talk about that, because that is a sociological idea, right? Which is that it is not it's a neutral term, but it's a neutral event. But that neutral event can have negative effects if it's not done by people who are also invested long-term into the neighborhood.
Right. And that's where it's like, well, we want resource. Like, if you talk to any of our neighbors who live next to a vacant house, right? Like, even the one over around the corner.
I live next to a vacant house.
Yes.
We actually just bought the vacant house a couple months ago, but for the first 4 or 5 years we lived here, it was just abandoned.
So now, you ask someone who lives next to a vacant house, you say, okay, who would you want to live here? And they kind of look at you funny. It's like, what do you mean who? Like, we just want it to be rehabbed and be a house for someone. Like, and they're like, a lot of them not gonna say, well, I don't care if they're white or brown, Asian, doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter.
I just care if they're like a decent human being.
Are they good people? You want a good neighbor looking after you, making tamales for your family, inviting you to the quinceañera. Come on,
to my neighbor, bro.
Yes.
My neighbor came through with the taquitos, the pastor con piña, bro.
The love is real. The love is real in the neighborhood. But and the sad part though is that we have so many vacancies. We have over 1,100 vacant properties in our neighborhood. That includes vacant lots and abandoned houses. That is a huge number. That's 10% of the city's blight and vacancies just in our community. With a land mass is a lot smaller. So like we hold a high rate of vacancies in the city of Memphis. How we address that though in a way that is equitable, right? The new buzzword that people are throwing out there, like, do we really understand what equity is giving ownership, right? We learned this from cities all over the country with our community coordinator, Christina Critchfield. Shout out to her. She's amazing.
Christina, we got to have her on the podcast too.
Yes, she will give you a unique perspective as a neighbor as well, and give you just like what she has learned by traveling to other cities and meeting with other people who have told us from Atlanta, from Chicago, from LA, other cities who have really experienced the gentrification that we're trying to, we're fearing, right? We're fearful of this. But the reality is Memphis is in no way, we are not at the same risk as other cities because we are not attracting and we're not retaining people to live in the city. We are losing our population of people. So like, when you see
we see frequently, and you can tell me what you think about this, but I think the term is like urban renewal. I think what has happened historically in Memphis is that there's a push and pull of like neighborhoods become built and old neighborhoods get divested in. Then Black people move out to those neighborhoods that were built. They move out of the urban center, and then white people or rich people move back into that urban center to revitalize it. And then that cycle kind of repeats itself frequently. At least in my family, that when we talk about it, that's kind of what we've noticed is like there's a lull, and then it's like a tide almost where like, you kind of see white people move in and out of the center of the city over and over and over again. But you're right, it's not new people. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily an influx of people who like, move to Memphis. And people really ain't just moving to Memphis like that. But it is rich people kind of coming back in and buying up property that maybe rich people used to live in 70 years ago, but was then left by white flight and then moved back into after the Black people finally got enough money to move into the neighborhood that the white people started to get away from.
Right. So that's like owning the land is one of the key things, right? So we've started to bank land, buy vacant properties with the understand that we want to preserve affordability and also promote home ownership at the same time. So it's like a two-pronged focus on this. Like if we can increase Black home ownership, then that will preserve our identity in the neighborhood and give people, instead of them paying $800, $900 a month for rent, how can we use that for them to start putting equity in a house? And also walking through it with people, what does it mean to be a homeowner? Like what like knowing more and talking more about like, what does that, $400 utility bill look like when it, like when it comes with it, like there's some things that we have to work on. A lot of it is education at the core of it. And, so doing those two things. The other thing too, is we are really focusing on creating more public spaces for everyone. So like that's an equity piece where if we're investing in parks,
so ownership, public
spaces, and then not just a home ownership piece, but also like preserving affordability. So if we own the land, we can preserve affordability. So like creating rental properties at a affordable rate. So our organization has 10 rental properties. Average rent is $450 a month, where the market rate rent in our neighborhood is around $800. Now it's gone up to $900 a month for a 2 or 3 bedroom house, 1 bathroom house. So
why do you think that's rising?
I mean, I think the market is rising across the country. I mean, it is a terrible time to buy a home right now because prices are so, I wouldn't say they're inflated. And I don't know the housing market. I just have to, I keep my eye on it because we purchase properties to rehab. And we also want to know like what direction our neighborhood is going in. So we have seen like houses sell for more than they've ever sold for in our neighborhood. One of the houses across from Collegiate is going to close today for $180,000. That's
what?
nuts.
So okay, here's the reference point. When my wife and I chose, like we were living in some apartments when we got married. My wife and I both have graduate degrees. We both grew up in the hood, but we're like, we feel convicted. We need to have our life lived with our people, specifically to do discipleship, but also to build equity and provide social capital. So we were looking at different houses. The houses in this neighborhood, bro, were like, it was like 50,000, 60,000 for a whole home.
Listen,
you know what I mean?
My wife.
So a house going for 180 doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So that's what you need to look at too. Like, get on Zillow and look at recently sold and look what's out there and look what they're listing.
I'm just gonna talk to you.
No, I'm telling you, like you can tell me, but like that's the thing that keeps me up at night. And Christina is like, we're all kind of concerned about this because it's happened in Binghamton, the neighborhood just south of us,
adjacent to us. That's why when I talk to people about the neighborhood that the Not a Coffee Shop is in or the coffee club is in, is like we're on the edge of gentrification. You know what I mean? Like we're on the edge of what has already kind of happened in Binghamton. I don't know if you can say Overton Square is gentrified, but the renewal and the reinvestment into that neighborhood, there's this thing called the green print, right? And I remember when I saw it, I felt like I got put on to some type of secret evil plan, because it's literally, they have all the neighborhoods that they want to reinvest in for the next 25 years in Memphis. And literally, like, if you walk through what's happening, the next neighborhood is our neighborhood. And then after that, they're going to get really into North Memphis, right? And like Fraser, and like, so it's kind of weird to see and I'm like, here's where I feel like a lot of our listeners could kind of maybe pull away some nuggets. If we're looking at those three things, right? Ownership, affordability, and maybe I could flip that for the purpose of our listeners: affordability, which leads to ownership, and then public spaces or cultural spaces for culture to grow. Right. When I talk about Black businesses, specifically Black businesses in coffee, and how the dialogue can happen, or the three areas of dialogue, I say you have diversity, right, which is kind of like integration. You have ownership, right, and then you have culture. So these three things kind of align. So I'm going to try to use those terms interchangeably for the purpose of our conversation. But diversity would be Black people in white spaces, brown people in white spaces, right? Then ownership would be us owning our own spaces, and then a different set of resources kind of needed to facilitate that. And then the last one is, how does this live outside of any type of financial transaction? How does this live in cookouts? How does this space facilitate art? And for me, it would be, how does coffee play its part in all those things? But you can sub in coffee for any business at this point, or any way to use resources, right? If we're talking about housing, right? How do we just get more people into housing, period? Right, into affordable housing, and then how do we make that affordable housing transition into ownership? And that's what doesn't happen in coffee, is people never make the transition when they're thinking about Black people into, how do we transition Black people into ownership, or Black communities into owning their own spaces. It just goes into, maybe we hire a few extra Black faces, right, which doesn't really solve issues or provide equity. So when we look in our neighborhood, if you're thinking about a business that wants to address diversity, ownership, and culture, or we could say affordability, ownership, and safe spaces, however we want to define those three things. I think they're kind of similar. It's funny because we didn't talk about this, but how would you say, what are some things that you've seen or would want a business to do in our neighborhood? I think it's useful for you to speak, because again, you're kind of leading this nonprofit in our neighborhood that does dope work, right? And a lot of coffee people don't really talk to or move their business plans in alignment with community leaders who do work in the communities there. They just move in. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's your point. Like, you're making the point for me, is that you came in this attitude of like, how can we learn from where people are already at work? And I think that's
even when we bought our house.
Yes.
Like, I was like, yo, you send me all this history, because I wanted to know. And you were like, yo, here's this, here's this organization doing this in our neighborhood, which was a big thing for us, because we know at the time my wife and I were educators. Now we're coffee educators. But whatever I'm doing, I can't do all the work. So I have to be in a place where I can align with work that's happening. You know what I mean? And where I feel good about the people I'm on the team with.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing. And you're also the discipleship piece, the piece of like connecting with the folks who are there and ready and willing. And that's the other part. I mean, that's in alignment with housing. You can't just assume that someone's going to be ready for home ownership. There's just like this,
Yep.
there's a thing that has to happen to where there's this education and just a realization of like, if you've never done something before, maybe you need to like, spend some time with someone who has so that you can figure it out. It's the same thing with community, but like you come in, find out where the neighborhood is at and learn from where they are and then get to know that before you, like you said, just open the door. Because you wrote something yesterday. I don't know if you wrote it yesterday, but it was like put out there about, the white walls and the Edison bulbs without shades. And just like that is not the vibe of our neighborhood. That is not going to fit for us. And you don't know what that fit is. You don't know what that culture and that vibe is until you've been at the kitchen table or been in the house of someone.
Yeah, you've been in somebody's auntie house, somebody's grandma house.
Yes, and broken bread with them. And if you haven't done that, then you're not going to have any kind of understanding of what the community can thrive on or get behind. They're not going to buy into something that doesn't look like them or wasn't built by them. So we've got to figure out how to change that,
or at the very least built with them in mind. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yes. I think there's room even to say, and I think let's just go ahead and put this on the table. You're probably going to take a loss if you do your business this way.
Well, that's interesting.
You're putting yourself at a risk. You're risking, right? Maybe profit. Maybe you're risking.
It's counter
somebody.
Yes.
You're. This is not a capitalistic endeavor. I do have a personal opinion about this type of business actually being more profitable in the long run, because I believe that God, his principles and his virtue, his that these things have as MLK, the arc of these things are redemptive, and I think they're profitable not just for people but also for purses. I'm not stop alliterating. My daddy was a preacher.
Well, let me say that. Listen, housing is the same way, and I've had really hard time putting into words my theology or my belief around housing and how everyone believes it's just this passive investment. People who are renting $900 a month, they spend more than maybe 50 to even 70% of their income on housing. That's how poverty is being maintained and perpetuated. It's not poverty. Our neighborhood is profitable to so many people. People who live in poverty, they're there. Our neighbors are here because people are profiting off of them. And I think that's what you have to see is that like your business decision, you as a business owner in our neighborhood, the fact that you even just can articulate that and say, listen, I'm playing the long game here for my community, and I'm not trying to make my profit up front. It's not going to, I'm taking my risk and my hit now with the understanding that I'm doing this with. The reality is, even in housing, where you can even talk about appreciation, this idea that a house is going to be valuable more in 10 years just because it'll appreciate as an asset. What's happening, though, is that investors are not looking for appreciation for the return on investment. They're looking for cash flow. And that is the bottom line to them. They don't care about the tenants. They care about the numbers on the spreadsheet. So until we figure out how to break that down and say, listen, if you want to be about like, whether it's kingdom building, community building, whatever your faith background is, and you really want to make a difference in the city of Memphis, let's take a long-term view. And what does appreciation of a person's livelihood look like? Not just the housing. Like, let's take a long view look at, like, instead of saying we're going to make $1,100 a month off of this property, can we take a step back, put some of that money into an escrow and to a down payment assistance program? You can still make that 9, 10, 12% return on your investment, but what would it look like to do that in a way that like was equitable and giving people opportunity for home ownership? So anyway, that's really deep. There's so much alignment in that, and for people who care about coffee and see it as a transformational bridge builder in a way.
And I'm gonna just say this: if you're listening to this podcast and coffee is just a thing to get energy from, this ain't for you. Like, this is not a conversation you're probably interested in. Go get you a couple Folgers and keep it moving. But for but for the people who are interested in coffee for its transitive properties, right? You know what I mean? For the cultural and ethnic and historical significance of this thing, right? It's not just a drink to you, as my brother Ibrahim said. It's connection with nature, with neighbors, with with the community, with God. To the Oromo people who discovered this thing that we all drink, coffee is everything. This is what my brother said. I'm paraphrasing. So if you're interested in that kind of coffee and making coffee able to actually be that in communities of color again, then this is kind of this is what I think about. This is what you and me talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And I think this is what provides the framework for the business decision to say, we're going to drop a fanny pack. You know what I mean? Or this is the type of business that this is what leads to the business decision to say, like, you know, we're going to give coffee away free every morning. You know what I mean? Or to say, like, instead of moving into we had 5 people hit us up it was like at some point last year, it was every month somebody was asking us to start a coffee shop. And we said no every time, but we said yes to a rebuilt building on National Street in the middle of like one of the brokest neighborhoods in the city.
Yeah, no one's coming here. Listen, when I drove by the coffee club today. I drove by there because of the electrical issue or whatever, you know, because y'all was running so many things going. Man, y'all got the espresso, y'all got the grinder, y'all got like 20, y'all got so many things going. There's like, I'm like, listen, we may like
a place where a young Black or brown or a poor white kid, some kid who's in poverty can come in and
were there.
Flourish into I have a coffee nerd's dream in the middle of the hood. So we got we got mocha masters, we have espresso machines, we got the fellow old, we got a fellow stag, we got the Akaya Pearl scale. I know this sounds like gibberish.
I don't know what any of that is, but I love it.
Scale. We got the actually I'm dialing it in right now. Y'all might be able to see it. Let me see. But that little machine, little V looking thing right there, right? That's a ratio. It's an $800 coffee brewer. And shout out to my man Twiz who donated $400 so that this kind of stuff can be in our neighborhood. Because one of my friends, Nichelle, says this so well. Black people deserve to experience quality things. Poor people deserve to experience quality things. And so you may not, and my man Prop says this. He says you may not ever be able to go to the best 5-star restaurant in the world, but you can experience one of the best cups of coffee in the world for like $3. That's crazy. That's access to quality that doesn't exist in other industries. We can equitably allow people to access quality. So like when I put out this stuff there, I don't know how many things are plugged into the wall that made the power go out, but it's like I wanted anything that somebody would need to fall in love with this thing instead of me who had to spend 7 years and I don't know how many dollars and go to a million shops all the time and spend way too much money to find out. Like everything you need is right here. And it's in the hood, and we're not going to advertise. I guess I'm advertising it now. No, we're not going to advertise this for all the coffee nerds who are already into this. This is here for the people who want to do this, to be able to access it in their own space, at their own leisure, at their own time. I'm not going to force it on you. You don't have to get into all this, but as you become more curious, there's plenty of stuff here for you. You know what I mean? And that's why.
And I think that's it. Yeah, and I think there's beauty in this. Like when I was up there, I saw people from the community from around the corner come get some coffee, and JC serving them with love and being able to see that transaction take place of learning and
it's such a beautiful thing to see a Black woman from South Memphis serving like some of the best coffee in the world in the middle of the hood, bro.
And then there was 2 license plates, not from Tennessee, one from Georgia, one from Virginia. And these folks got money. I mean, the cars are nice or whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, you've had that draw because you're attracting people to the community. And I know, and you're not attempting to do that. But what the reality is, sometimes that can be a good thing to have that mix. Like when you mentioned diversity, it's not just about racial and ethnic diversity. It's also socioeconomic mixing. And when we talk about our public space improvements right now, when you really want someone like, listen, when I was living in Philly, I'm gonna rep my Philly Eagles right now. When I was living in Philly, you're sitting on the subway or the train next to somebody that could, be making 6 or 7, 7 figures. And we don't have that type of mixing here in Memphis, right? Because it's been done intentionally to divide us. So the closest things we have to it, and I'm a big fan of libraries. Our libraries are great. You live down the street. The street from. But you can meet people there from all walks of life who are just there to learn and to
or
grow
who
and
are there
expand
just
their
for a book
minds.
that's
Like,
not at their own, you know,
or just to stay
that's
warm at the same
yeah,
time. Like, you're going to find people looking for different resources from that space. The park is a place to go, like, play ball, to hoop. The park is a place to go walk your dog.
I gotta go
The
hoop
park is
over
for
there
the
too, bro.
older ladies. Like, play soccer. There's so many things. The park is a place for you to take your family and your kids. Those
Yeah.
common grounds in those common areas. And what you're doing is activating a space on National Street where you create a common ground. And there's some sort of play on words there with coffee grounds.
No,
But
yeah, I feel you.
common grounds. But
Yeah.
there is something to be said for that, because when I saw that this morning, I was just like, you know what? This is it. This is achieving what you're setting out to do. We do need to be and revisit this, to be more intentional of reaching neighbors. And we talked about this. I probably mentioned 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, no, because I had this idea, bro, of doing like canvassing the neighborhood, like a political campaign. So we're saying make coffee black again, you know, but what if we ran it like a political campaign where we have on shirts and it says like 2021 and we're going around giving out flyers. And
man, people
like,
might want to drink a coffee tomorrow, to be honest with you. I think people tomorrow morning, if you went and was like, listen, we know that things are crazy in our country right now. Here's a cup of coffee. It'll give you a little boost today. Like something like that, where, you know, it'll hit them at the right time. And but I'm with you.
COVID,
I feel you,
bro.
On that.
Like, this is the weird part about trying to do
is hard.
Community organizing work. Essentially, is what I'm trying. I'm trying to take what I've learned from community organizing in college and in Chicago and apply that to how we kind of build out our coffee program. But I'm like, we can't do it during COVID. One, we just had a baby. So the baby is obviously,
we'll get there.
We're kind of quarantined for 6 weeks. But, and then even when we come out, when the baby can kind of fight off pathogens on his own, when young Thurgood can fight off pathogens on his own, it's still an issue, because it's like, man, it's kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't want to just go knocking on people's doors when it's a virus going around. Like, that feels disrespectful. But we're in the neighborhood, and like the neighbor, even though we're in the same neighborhood, my neighbors aren't necessarily the neighbors to the coffee shop because it's 3 blocks away. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I have ideas too about like working with food vendors in the neighborhood, bro. My neighbor Danielle, he's Afro-Latino, bro. He makes fire taquitos. I'm like, what would it look like for us to, specifically with some other people's money, pay for there to be a food truck or for there to be catering, and maybe we advertise for a week and just be like, yo, coffee and tacos. You know what I mean? Because our neighborhood is really, it's like what, 30% black. You know the real numbers, because I know y'all got to say this all the time to raise money, but it's like 30% black, 30% Latino, 20% white, 10% Asian and like Muslim, something like that.
Everything else, I mean, we are definitely in the most diverse neighborhood in Memphis, and I know Binghamton likes to claim the same thing, but if you look at the way things are trending, it's not going to be that way much longer, and we're at risk of that too. Like when you talk about this idea of like how do we prevent displacement from neighbors and for it just to be homogenous. No one wants to live. I mean, I don't say no one. There are folks who want to live in a homogenous neighborhood too. And that's where I've struggled. Like there are people who are anti, it'll get us down another rabbit hole, but integration. Like we don't want to integrate. Right? We're better off on our own if we don't integrate. And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that's the way we were made to live. And I think that the reality, like we've done this to ourselves, and I don't think forced integration is a good thing, but I do think that like integration organically, naturally,
integration without assimilation is valuable. I think so. If you have integration without the loss of Black autonomy, I suppose self-determination is good. But I think of the people, like a lot of my friends who, and I sometimes fall into this too, you know what I mean? Like there has to be a way to basically raise your own children and also let them have friends. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, there has to be a way to be like, I'm going to raise the community up basically to have a certain set of values and principles that are aligned with our own self-preservation. But also, I want to be able to connect with other cultures because I'm a coffee nerd. I want to be able to drink coffee from the beautiful coffee from Colombia. You're actually about to import some Afro-Colombian coffee, which is a thing I want to talk to a lot of my Latin American neighbors about. You know what I mean? I'm pretty excited about it. But like, you know, like those are some of the things that it's a challenge. But I was talking about this yesterday on IG, and it's like, if we use coffee as a metaphor, which I'm going to, then there's the art of the blend has been lost, because most people think and use blends as a way to demean the integrity of the origin and of the identity of each origin. So we're gonna basically disinvest in whatever coffees we're using. We'll disinvest in this Colombian and we'll disinvest in this Ethiopian. We're not gonna invest as much money into the quality here, and then throw them together and just, whatever the cheapest option we got. But if you want to do it well, you actually have to invest more into the authenticity of each one. And again, in our faith practice, because you have to know how they complement. And if you have to know how they complement, you have to have a better idea of what they are. And so I think that I use the analogy of the body a lot. The goal is not to say we need all feet. Like, the scriptures don't say that. The scriptures say instead that each of us should be equally invested in, so that we can operate in our highest function, so that then we can serve the greater purpose of the whole. But the individual purpose exists in synchronicity or in symbiosis with the whole. And I guess that's kind of what I'm saying when it comes to the whole debate about integration versus segregation, because a lot of my Black friends, and I'll still say this, like, one of the worst things that did happen to the Black community was integration, because the way it happened, it didn't become I think a way a lot of civil rights leaders expected it to. And when you look at the stats are worse. You know, and maybe people can argue. Yeah. Obviously, I think my life is better now than it would have been in 1960. But I do think that there is an issue, which I think at the end of the day is what we're talking about. Nobody has a time machine anyway. The issue is that when it happens without the maintaining of self-determination, when you lose self-determination, right, then that becomes an issue. So how do you have community without sameness? And coffee honestly is one of those ways where you see, like, there's just this really crazy thing how in the coffee community, like, we're all doing coffee, but it's all being done so differently. But each different function of coffee is still like the quality of coffee in Colombia is an interdependent thing. It's independent, but the livelihood of people who do coffee in Colombia affects the livelihood of people who do coffee in Haiti.
Yes.
And vice versa. And even though they all need their own individual that's another issue too. That when we talk about integration, a lot of times what that turns into, well, we're not going to specifically invest in the unique needs that this community has or that this history has, and you lose that. But then if you do that, oftentimes you end up with a separate but equal thing where you say, well, we're just going to invest in them, and that never happens if there's no relationships between different communities. You know what I mean? Authentic, real, you know what I mean? Like meaningful, kind of interdependent relationships.
Yeah, I think
that was going to take us down a rabbit hole.
No, I did. But that's something we have to be.
It's important.
We have to think about, and we have to just figure out, like, I said this at the beginning, and I don't know if this is a good way to close it or not. This has to happen, right? We have to have conversation for it to happen. I'm not someone that usually likes to stop and talk and contemplate. I'm more about trying to get the work done and, like, send the emails and do the grant applications and contact the contractors. And, like,
I want to see some of them too. I got to hit you up, bro.
Yes.
Because there's somebody who was like, yo, we'll donate some. I'm like, please. Because we don't do credit in our business. So I'm like, they working hard at the AGCC, and we just set up direct deposit. So, so when it comes, I don't want no negative accounts.
Yes. And I think that's the thing, is that we've got to figure that out and have these conversations to be able to move forward on our shared goals and our shared vision. And I think that's, like, someone interviewed me and you last week for this story for the local paper here. And, like, that's what I think that we need to do more of. Our country is so divided. Our city is so divided. Even our neighborhood is divided in so many different ways that until you have this opportunity to find similarities and something that we can, there's no better way. We talk about breaking bread with your neighbors and spending time in their house and bringing them over. But even just in a crisis situation, like what you did for me and my family, checking on us, constantly texting, seeing how
bro,
we
we
were
was
doing.
ready,
Like,
bro. I had the
I
shots
know.
right up there. I was like, hey, whatever we got to do. Y'all can't see us a shelf right here. I was like, yo, whatever we got to do.
Listen, and I appreciate that. I have my own views on gun ownership, obviously.
I know you do. But I was like, hey, but I got different views and I'm ready. Just know I got different views, but I'm ready when you need it.
And I felt the support, and the prayers from that. And I think that's what community is at the end of the day.
And that's diversity. Yeah. You have views, and I respect your views, right? Yeah. And I have views, and you respect mine. But that's just know, even in my difference, I'm here to pull up if you need it, and vice versa. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of what we need to see more of. And if you're interested, my man's got to go. It's 3:00. But if you're interested in coffee and gentrification, we got to have y'all back on again. Definitely got to have Christina on. But if you're interested in this conversation, please subscribe and think about how you, even in your uniqueness, can contribute to the value and circulate the blood in the body. You know what I mean? That's kind of the goal here. So just to recap those three things, like if you want to be a part of affecting or resisting gentrification as a coffee shop or even as a business owner, there are three things you can look for: accessibility, affordability. That's one issue, but also, or we can say diversity, but also the issue of promoting ownership within the space, right? And hiring people from the neighborhood, allowing or training people in the trade that you do so that they can start their own businesses, right? Is another issue. And then also the last one we just talked about, like contributing to the civil discourse in the communal and artistic and familial space, is also another role that I think a unique role that businesses can play. So, man, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. Appreciate you, bro.
I really enjoyed it.
You know, thanks, we're here for you, bro. Let us know if there's anything y'all need. You know, we got love for y'all.
Appreciate you. See ya.
Appreciate you, bro. Be easy.
Hey, yo, so check it. By popular request, Coffee Black presents our first ever coffee subscription program, the Brew Culture Subscription Box. We've gained so much positive feedback and interest from our growing community for our Gucci Mane blend that we've sought to bring you a monthly subscription via our website. So what does that mean for you? 1, mad money savings, yo. For $35, you'll receive 2 12-ounce bags that can make up to 40 pour-overs. That's 90 cents a cup. Compare that to your local Starbucks price. 2, inside perks. You'll be first in line for our newest and latest releases, including monthly admittance to the private brew ups, our monthly coffee ciphers happening in our private Facebook group. 3, you'll be supporting a Black-owned business that continues to seek to build up the Black community in Memphis and worldwide through reclaiming Black coffee culture.